Welcome, students. Today we're going to talk about some basic concepts that have to do with government, democracy, and economics. Before we get started with notes, take a few moments and reflect on the first two questions on your note sheet. Why do we need government? What is its purpose? Jot down a few of your thoughts. All right, government. What is it? Government is the system that a society uses to create its laws and its policies, the rules that people have to follow. Government power is divided down into three types. You've got legislative power, executive power, and judicial power. Check out this chart here. It shows you the three types of power, legislative, executive, and judicial, and how they're broken down in the United States based on our Constitution. Legislative power is the power to make laws, to design laws, to spell out what the laws, the rules, the policies are going to say exactly. Executive power is the power to enforce those laws, actually make those laws happen, make them have effect in real life. And judicial power is the power to interpret laws. This means applying the laws the way that they're written to real life situations and to circumstances that people find themselves in. All right, the next concept we need to talk about is this term referred to as the state. Now, we use this word state in a lot of ways. I want to make sure that you understand exactly how we're going to be talking about this word in class and what it means to us in talking about government. The state is a term that has a very, very, very specific meaning. States involve four characteristics. In other words, you have to have four things going for you if you're going to be a state. And the four things are listed right here: territory, population, sovereignty, and government. The idea of territory basically describes the land that that place occupies, what is represented on a map, the physical space that that place takes up. Population is the group of people that live in that territory. Sovereignty is this idea that those people have the ability to control themselves. In other words, they don't have to listen to really anybody else. They're in charge of at least some, if not all, of their own decisions. And government means that they have a system in place to shape their laws and the rules that they have to follow. Make note of these four characteristics on your note sheet, and then take a few moments to answer those questions underneath. Is the USA a state? Why or why not? Is Virginia a state? Why or why not? Give another example of a state and explain why this is the case. Are you a state? Why or why not? As you're answering those questions, remember that a state has to have all four of those characteristics. A state has to have territory, population, sovereignty, and government. And if you're having any trouble coming up with answers for those, just jot down your thoughts or jot down your questions. This will be certainly something that we cover in class together. All right, next let's talk about how the system of government for a state can be organized in different ways. The first way that governments can be different is in terms of who gets to hold the power in that government. There's lots of options. Different countries do it different ways. And it really has to do with which people or how many people get to be involved in the decision-making process. If a country follows a system of government called autocracy, that means that one person is in charge of the entire government. One person is going to make all of the decisions. So think about situations where a country is being led by a king or a dictator. There you're talking about an autocracy. Another option is to have a small group of people making the rules and the decisions for the government. This system is called oligarchy. You might have all of the rich people involved in a country making the rules and the government. And of course that means that if you're not rich, you're not involved in making any government decisions. The other important example is democracy. Democracy is a system of government where the people, in large numbers, all have at least a small say in what their government is doing. Typically this happens in systems of government where people vote either directly for the laws that they're going to follow or for representatives that are going to design those laws for everybody else. We also want to consider how the system of government relates to the territory that is being controlled in that state. And once again, there are three options that most places seem to follow. You have a unitary government, a confederate government, and a federal government. Let's talk about what each one of those means. A unitary government is a government where all of the rules essentially come out of one place. So think about one capital city that makes the government decisions, the rules, the laws, the policies for the entire territory. It's a pretty common system of government if you look at different countries around the world. An option that is completely different than that is what we refer to as a confederate system. A confederate system involves a territory that is divided up into independent states. These independent states each have their own leadership, their own capital, a place that makes the rules for them, but they might kind of team up with one another, group together to make decisions, common decisions that involve trade or protection from other countries, things like that. And then the idea that kind of combines those two, combines the unitary system with the confederate system, is what we refer to as a federal system. This is where you have a large territory that's divided up into smaller states. Those smaller states have their own government that makes decisions for that locality. But there's also a larger government, like the unitary government, that makes laws and rules and policies for the entire territory. As you're completing your note sheet, make sure that you're addressing the questions that you're being asked. For each one of these, the unitary, the confederate, and the federal system, make sure you know where the power is located. Look for that information on the slide. And then you also will want to jot down some important details, maybe better descriptions of how these systems work based on what you're reading or what you have heard me say. And then finally, before you move on from this slide, think about which one of these applies best to the United States. Does the United States use a unitary system? Does it use a confederate system? Or does it use a federal system? Jot down an answer, and also some evidence that shows how you know it is that choice. Okay, and here's your answer. The United States uses a federal system. Think about the fact that the United States is actually divided down into 50 states. Each one of those states has their own government that sets the laws for that state. But on top of all of those 50 state governments, we have a national government or a federal government that handles national laws and national affairs. We use a federal system of government in the United States. So let's shift gears and talk about economics. Economics is the study of how people use their resources. Things like time, money, materials, that sort of stuff. And it's very closely connected to government, because government in a society makes decisions, policies, rules, and laws that shape how people make their economic choices. The big question that people ask themselves when they're thinking about how much the government of their society is going to relate to the economics of their society is, how much do we want the government to be involved in making our own economic choices? Once again, we have several options. We're going to go through each one of those in turn. The first option for answering that question of how much government involvement do you want in your economic system is the free market system. And here the answer is pretty clear. We don't want any sort of government involvement in the economy. In a free market system, government stays out of economic affairs. So who makes the decisions about what's good for the economics of that society? It's determined by competition. Different businesses competing with one another for profit, for money, and for business. So think back to when you learned about economic ideas like supply and demand. Those things are critical to a free market system. Capitalism is a term that you're going to hear a lot that connects pretty closely with the free market system. What capitalism means is that all of the factors of production, the things that people need to make, build, and sell things, are controlled by individual people. And the government's role in capitalism is to largely leave the economy alone. And here we have another important term that you might hear, laissez-faire. It's a French term that just means leave it alone. And this is what capitalists, people who live in a capitalist society, expect that their government will do. On the other end of the spectrum, you have socialism, and this is where the government is heavily involved in the economic decisions of that society. You don't have individual people owning the companies and the businesses and the other factors of production. The government owns the factors of production, and the government makes economic decisions. What the government will do in a socialist society is take control of producing things. And of course, if they have control over producing things, they can make money. And what they do with that money is provide for the basic needs of the citizens in that country. So if you live in a socialist society, chances are you're going to be heavily taxed, but the government is going to provide for a lot of your basic needs, things like health care, child care, college expenses, and things like that. Communism is another economic term that you're going to hear a lot. Communism is a system that is based on sharing. All of the resources are shared by the members of that society, and because everyone sort of agrees to share and share alike, a government, in this case, is really not necessary. Communism is a really detailed and involved idea, but it doesn't happen in real life very often. The most common type of economic system that you're going to see looking at countries around the world is the mixed economy. And this is an economy that has blended together elements of capitalism and socialism. So you have some private ownership of property, but also a considerable amount of government involvement in economic decisions. And this can happen in lots of different ways. So as you're wrapping things up, what I'd like for you to do is to reflect upon that last question. Think about the economic systems that we've just gone through. Which one of these is the one that's used here in the United States? Give some evidence to back up your answer.